My Lady, alongside Mr Bradley and Mr Weaver of Council, instructed by Mr Wilcox of Hudgell Solicitors, I represent three core participant groups: the Vaccine Injured and Bereaved UK, the Scottish Vaccine Injury Group and the UK CV Family. You have our written submissions, and I'm grateful that they've been considered carefully by Council to the inquiry and for the responses provided this morning. We have in turn listened carefully to Mr Keith King Council's submissions this morning, and I'd like to emphasise a few key points. I'll deal with the most practical point first, my lady, the timetabling of hearings, because for those I represent, the delay in substantive oral hearings from July this year to January next year has a significant impact. It may be seen as modest in the inquiry's timings, but it's significant to those I represent. The delay has only served to further exacerbate the feelings of marginalisation within the groups and has caused considerable stress to people who've already faced significant challenges. There are several significant implications. Members of our groups have serious degenerative conditions and will face deterioration in their health over the next 6 months. Others are still enduring a long wait for treatment that is being denied to them, meaning that their conditions will increasingly impact on their ability to participate and engage. And I ask my lady to bear in mind that the fact that the hearings will now be in the middle of winter also means that those with respiratory conditions will find travelling difficult or impossible. The delay in the substantive hearings and the establishment of a clear factual narrative around the COVID-19 vaccines maintains a large lacuna in the public understanding within which important questions continue to go unanswered and within which further serious mistrust of government and healthcare institutions may grow. The delay in the inquiry recording a clear factual narrative also undermines its ability to make meaningful recommendations for change, which we know are important to you, my lady. We've impressed on you before the sheer number of people in the UK likely to have been injured by the COVID-19 vaccines. As of the 10th of May 2024, we understand the yellow card system to have received 2,688 reports of fatalities and 486,250 individual reports, over 300,000 of which were reported as serious. And these weren't just injuries reported in relation to vaccines that have now been withdrawn from the UK. And it's important to note that the COVID-19 vaccine programme continues in the UK for some cohorts. The groups that I represent have urged you, my lady, to make critical recommendations in key areas that significantly impact their lives. These include the need for medical, financial, emotional and cultural support. A pressing example of this is the need for reform of the vaccine damage payment scheme. And without reform, thousands of people are being left without proper recourse to compensation or financial support and are exposed to ongoing disbelief and a continued lack of medical and emotional support for their injuries and online abuse. Therefore, my lady, given the delay as the inquiry receives and considers evidence, we are urging you to consider making interim recommendations, particularly focus on the provision of medical, emotional and financial support for the vaccine injured and bereaved. In addition to the concerns I've set out regarding delay, we echo the concerns raised by others in relation to the duration of the oral hearings. Even on the scope now proposed in the recent CTI note and outlined by Mr Keith this morning, we submit that a thorough and adequate investigation cannot be achieved within 11 or 12 days. The inquiry has currently requested statements from over 120 witnesses. We simply ask, how is it possible to hear that significant evidence in that timescale? May I then turn to the issue of scope, my lady, and this will be the main focus of my oral submissions. Dealing first, please, with vaccine safety. We, of course, are pleased to hear that the inquiry considers the issue of vaccine safety as a hugely important issue. We agree. Mr Keith has reiterated this morning that it will not be possible to examine matters in the level of a single issue inquiry. But, my lady, it's important to note at the outset that over 100,000 members of the public, via parliamentary petition, called for such a single issue inquiry regarding the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. The government has to date refused to establish such an inquiry, citing the fact that my lady's inquiry would examine the COVID-19 pandemic. It was said by Council to the Inquiry in their written note, and this morning again, that they want to focus on systems, processes and outcomes and how they can be improved. Our first submission and it may simply be a use of language, but it bears stating, is that any focus on outcomes of the vaccine must acknowledge and record the facts that for many people, those outcomes were injury or bereavement from the vaccine. The inquiry states that it will examine the nature and efficacy of the regulatory regime for the approval of vaccines, but we have raised the question, how can the inquiry assess regulation without understanding and scrutinising the underlying data before the regulators? And Mr. Keith agrees that this is a necessary examination within the inquiry's approach. But we urge the inquiry to approach within a forensic and critical mind to the data it's presented with. Who was presenting the data to the regulators? Was it accurate? Was it adequate? Did the regulators properly explore or test that data in making their determinations on vaccine safety? In their written note, Counsel to the Inquiry also stated that it would address, quote, the safety-related debate over vaccines, but will not reach a concluded view on the safety of specific vaccines, or attempt to quantify the precise risk of vaccination. My lady, I make the simple point that this is not a debate for those I represent. The vaccine was not safe for them, and it has caused physical injury and/or bereavement. In our submission, the role of this inquiry is not to address the safety debate. It is to find facts and record an accurate narrative of vaccine safety. The inquiry states it is concerned with specific vaccine-related issues, such as misinformation and disinformation. However, if the inquiry does not record an accurate public narrative of vaccine safety, then a vacuum remains with a lot of probing, unsettling and unanswered questions within which further misinformation and disinformation can be spread. The inquiry also wants to understand vaccine hesitancy and how to improve vaccine confidence. However, without an accurate narrative of vaccine safety, the inquiry will not be able to understand what the factors impacting on confidence might have been in the past, which are highly likely to include concerns around safety. In our submission, any analysis of vaccine confidence is fundamentally flawed without understanding the true impact and risk of the vaccine and what was known about that risk at the time of the rollout, as well as how that risk was perceived. The groups that I represent are concerned that throughout the pandemic, there was a persistent narrative that vaccines were safe and that the benefits outweighed the risks. In our submission, the inquiry should examine what is meant by a vaccine having a, quote, favourable safety profile, and how these safety profiles are assessed, and, for example, what criteria were used. Moreover, a genuine concern arises regarding what we perceive as a significant deficiency in the dissemination of vaccine risk information, both generally, but in particular among individuals from minoritized backgrounds, potentially attributed to structural discrimination. This discrimination, potentially evidenced by factors such as access to healthcare resources, language barriers, and distrust in medical institutions, may have hindered some communities' understanding of the risks associated with the vaccine.